Hello and welcome to the Signal Hour, everybody. Remember, we're here to find the signal within the signal. X is the signal now, and mainstream media is on the way out. Good riddance, and a lot of damage they've done along the way. So thank you for being here with me today. This is a live cast, so I'm watching the chats over here, pressing buttons, trying to keep it all moving along. So if you have something you want to add to the conversation, a question you'd like to ask, go for it. Shoot it right in there, and I'll be monitoring that. Lots to talk about today. Obviously, what we've been covering for the past, well, a little over a week now, back at Peak Prosperity with all my subscribers there is, of course, the escalations that have happened around Russia and that new IRBM, intermediate range ballistic missile. Never saw one of those in action before. I'm sure you haven't either. It was the first time one has been used in a conventional military setting. And by conventional, I have to torture that word a little. It did have conventional, not even conventional, it just had dummy warheads. But by dummy warheads, we're talking about things that dropped out of the sky at Mach 10. And it was pretty impressive. I hope saner heads all around the West and NATO are starting to rethink things because that was pretty dramatic and unnecessary. And we're hoping that that doesn't continue. But if it does, I guess everybody needs to be prepared for how this could turn out. Now, I do want to, this time today, we're going to be talking about continuing last time's theme on the lawfare. I want to talk about the things that have been happening, and thankfully, hopefully, we can turn the corner on this. Maybe have we hit peak woke? Hopefully, is that the apex or the nadir? You decide. Hopefully, we're past that, and we can start to heal and recover. And as well, lots of things have been happening in the United States, but as well in the UK and in Germany that really are a very awkward, uncomfortable, dare I say, immoral use of the legal system and associated structures to, well, punish opponents, right? To political opponents. In fact, this really caught me. I want to talk about, let's start here. This is Mark Andreessen. He's on with Joe Rogan. He's talking about one thing here. Listen in on this. Let me make sure I got my volume level set correctly here so that there are no surprises. I hope this should work.
This started about 15 years ago with this thing called Operation Choke Point, where they decided to, as marijuana started to become legal, as prostitution started to become legal, and then guns, which there's always a fight about. Under the Obama administration, they started to debank legal marijuana businesses, escort businesses, and then gun shops, just like your gun manufacturers, and just like you're done, you're out of the banking system. And so if you're running a medical marijuana dispensary in 2012, like you, guess what? You're doing your business all in cash. Because you literally can't get a bank account, you can't get a Visa terminal, you can't process transactions, you can't do payroll, you can't do direct deposit, you can't get insurance. Like none of that stuff is, you've been sanctioned, right? None of that stuff is available. And then this administration extended that concept to apply it to tech founders, crypto founders, and then just generally political opponents. So, yeah, so that's been like super pernicious.
And I wasn't aware of that.
Oh, 100%. And this is called, so it was Operation Choke Point 1.0 was 15 years ago against the pot and the guns. Choke Point 2.0 is primarily against their political enemies and then to their disfavored tech startups. And it's hit the tech world like we've had like 30 founders debanked in the last 4 years.
Really?
Yeah. It's been a big recurring pattern.
30.
This is one of the reasons why we ended up supporting Trump. It's like we can't live in this world. We can't live in a world where somebody starts a company that's a completely legal thing and then they literally like get sanctioned, right, and embargoed by the United States government through a completely unaccountable, by the way, no due process. None of this is written down. There's no rules. There's no court. There's no decision process. There's no appeal. Who do you appeal to, right? Like who do you go to get your bank account back?
What? I knew about a lot of this. I didn't know about this much. I did not know about 30 tech startups because presumably they're involved in some kind of tech startup that the administration didn't like. This listen, it always starts with, oh, we have to fight a war on drugs. Next thing you know, you're no better than the people you're fighting the drug war against. You become the monster you seek to slay, and then it's because of the children and this and that. Next thing you know, it's just random political opponents. Like I remember. It was shocking. It should have been, I think, more shocking to me. It should have registered more. But when Nigel Farage got debanked, okay? And, oh, hi, Technological Singularity. Good to see you. Good to see Granite State Man. Hello, Evie, Sonelius, all that. Yeah, and nuts bolts, it is time for me to get on Rogue. And I agree, because there's so many things I want to talk about, not least of which would be the actual state of our economic plight here in this world. And once we really talk about the predicament we're up against, I think we have to have an adult-sized conversation. But this is the point. We haven't had these adult-sized conversations. It's up to the podcasters. That's why we have the Signal Hour now, too, to collect this and bring it together. But let's talk about what's actually going on here. They are debanking people because they don't like them. They don't think they're running the right tech company, or maybe they're going to do something that runs counter to something that some political person wants, or maybe it's just because their ex is started a company and they're misusing the power of the state in this regard. But the debanking is a hand in glove kind of a thing, right? We saw this with the Canadian truckers, right? So they didn't like the illegal actions that were being taken by the government of Canada to lock their lives down, doing all the stupid stuff that was happening in the United States, right? Oh, well, you're an essential worker, so you got to keep going to work. That mostly means you're DoorDash, you're a garbage man or woman, you're a person who's involved in something that the laptop class needed to be brought to their apartment, and they called themselves non-essential. At any rate, they were protesting that. And then people actually donated to their cause, totally legal, and they had their accounts frozen by the banks. So the banks are no longer operating as a private business. They are operating as an organ, an operating arm, an enforcement arm, a punishment arm of the government. And that happens in Canada, it happens in the UK, it happens here in the United States. So I'm glad to see this getting some, we needed to get some daylight on this. This is a very bad practice, obviously. Here's what I believe. I truly believe that Charlie Munger had it absolutely right. If you show me the outcome, show me the incentive, I will show you the outcome, he said. Meaning incentives have to be aligned with the overall outcome that you want. Okay, so in San Francisco, they raised the shoplifting limit to $950, and they got more shoplifting because the incentive was there to shoplift up to $950. Obvious. This is just such obvious stuff. But for whatever reason, the totalitarianism, the collectivists, the people who believe in using processes as the punishment, the people who use the organ of the state as a weapon, mostly as a means of like making the lives of other people miserable. And I think they do that psychologically because their lives are miserable, but they don't know how to elevate their own mood. So they work to bring other people down to their level. It's the pigeon chess strategy, right? So this is pretty shocking that this has been going on. I'm glad to see it getting a little bit of daylight now. Very important. And I think we should extend this further to understand all the ways that the US government has been behaving very badly. And it definitely, Julian Assange deserves a pardon. Now, I know that he's made a plea deal and he's no longer held in custody. And he had to fly to Australia and all that stuff. But here we see James McGovern of Congress, Thomas Massie, member of Congress as well. Really love Thomas Massie a lot, by the way. Writing to Biden in this case saying, hey, actually, we think that there should be a pardon for Julian Assange. Why? Because it turns out that Assange had to plead guilty to felony charges under Section 793 of the Espionage Act. And of course, prosecuting him under that Espionage Act sets off all kinds of alarm bells because now suddenly somebody doing their normal course of business, right, as a journalist, is suddenly going to potentially find themselves running afoul of being charged with espionage when they're actually doing ordinary, normal, regular reporting. A big job. Remember, fourth estate, right? You know, you got the executive, the legislative, the judicial, press. Press is supposed to be that fourth estate, as they say. It is there to provide that final check and balance because, again, incentives and outcomes are aligned. If people in power can get away with being awful, crappy human beings without any check or balance, without any accountability, then they will keep being those kinds of people. And eventually they'll bring people under them who are also those kinds of people. And the next thing you know, you have an entire unaccountable, crappy organization. And that's just how the whole thing exists now because it's been polluted and the whole thing will have to be dismantled and sent packing, which I actually hope happens under the DOGE, the Department of Governmental Efficiency, under Elon and Vivek. I really hope, because I think some of our institutions are broken beyond repair. They've had too many cycles of just being abusive, and they've forgotten how all this is supposed to work. So therefore, McGovern and Massey are asking for a pardon for Mr. Assange. I doubt they'll get one here because that's not the kind of thing that the Biden administration would do, because this would be a positive thing and it would be right. So probably not going to do that, but I think they've set the standard here, and I'm glad they've done it, because now this puts it on the deck to happen during the Trump administration. And by the way, Roger Ver also deserves a pardon. We covered that last time with Tracy Thurman, and Roger Ver, if you don't know, is being prosecuted for having the temerity to leave the United States because he was being treated very badly, took his capital elsewhere, did it completely above board, and then 10 years later, unfortunately, wrote a book that kind of, I don't know, might have been found embarrassing, or he did a few things with his money that the U.S. government didn't like, so they decided to reach back out with the long arm of the, I hate to call it law, because that makes it sound legit. At any rate, I think he deserves a pardon as well. And I think it's time to pardon Snowden as well. He gave information to the American public. It was very instructive to me to know what was going on. And it didn't in any way, shape, or form destroy America's ability to be a big, giant, sovereign empire doing what it does. But it did allow us to understand that American citizens were being illegally spied upon. And let me emphasize, illegal. Okay. So I would love to see that get changed up as well. Let me see what this, let's put this up here. So here we have UK government is sanctioning journalists too, freezing assets and debanking from Alexander G. Yeah, that's just how it works, right? They don't like you. They don't like what you're doing. So guess what? They're going to use the process as the punishment. You haven't done anything illegal. They haven't charged you with any crime. But oh boy, they're going to make your life miserable. Now that's just a weenie move right there, right? Any bureaucrat who does something like that, in my mind, automatic exclusion from public life. And by the way, I think I could fix all this stuff pretty easily. Remember back to, you show me the incentive, I show you the outcome. There was a company I worked for back in the day, and it had a policy. It was a body shop, right? A lot of consulting. But they had a policy, the bottom 10% of their employee base in a calendar year at the end of the year that didn't perform, didn't have enough billable hours, didn't land new clients. The bottom 10% just fired, just summarily every year, let go. Now, guess what? The remaining people saw that and worked harder. And I think overall it created a fairly effectively competitive internal environment so that people would go out and do what they could externally for the company. I get it. Not saying it was perfect, but man, it worked. What if, imagine this, imagine you're a government employee. You work at the DMV. You work at, I don't know, Department of Agriculture. You work for the Army Corps of Engineers. Some way or shape or form, you work for the government, and your job, of course, is to interface with the public. Army Corps of Engineers, somebody wants to put in a pond, there's regulations, there's forms to be filled out, there's hearings to be held, there's all this stuff. Well, what if the person who's doing the applying, they get to Yelp review you, right? And hey, guess what? Every bottom, and by the way, that's your job as a public servant, is to serve the public. So if the public you're serving has decided you're in the bottom 10% of unpleasant people who they'd rather not work with, then you get fired. This would, can you imagine? Because normally this is how the government, usually you call them up and they're like, Department of Business Prevention, how may I stop you? Right? And it would become totally different. They'd be calling you up saying, hey, can I help? Did that form make sense? I've shepherded this through. I just want to make sure you understand how to get through this next hearing, right? They would get back into public service. And if you're not built for public service, you're just bad at it, well, then you should get fired. And that's just the way it is. So at any rate, I agree with his statement here. The public is supposed to be their boss, not their enemy. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Keeper D says a Yelp review is a social credit score, slippery slope. I'm not sure about that, because this is what happens in any company. Bad employees get weeded out. The deal is that for a company, you have a motive, you have a profit motive there, you have an incentive for why you want to get rid of bad employees who treat the customers poorly, who continually mess things up, who don't seem to be very productive. You get rid of them. That's just how that works. So why not for the government as well? It should be the same deal, don't you think? I certainly do. So not sure that's a slippery slope. I call it just life. And I think the January 6ers all need to be pardoned now that we're getting more information about what actually happened on January 6th in terms of the fact that there were lots of federal people there. There were in agent provocateurs. We saw people, plainclothes, so-called, hanging out in the crowd. Now that we have the video data, we can see who opened the doors actually, because those big 10-ton doors didn't just sort of open by themselves, those magnetically sealed doors. They were instigators out there, and as well, now it's pretty obvious that there were a lot of people pushing for that to be as insurrection-y as possible and then branding it as such. And almost all of those people were swamp rats working in DC. So I would love to see some actual investigation of that. And as well, I think that the punishments here have been way, way over the top. Way over the top. Now, pardoned and compensated, says Broja there. Yeah, absolutely. Let's pardon and compensate them. I agree. One more thing then. So this is actually, I think, getting good here. Robbie Starbuck has been just doing absolute incredible yeoman's work out there looking at the DEI policies, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And massive news just came out yesterday that Walmart is ending their woke policies. What? I can now exclusively tell you, he writes here, what's changing and how it happened. Last week, I told execs at Walmart I was going to do a story on wokeness there, and instead, we had productive conversations to find solutions. Below are the changes Walmart committed to. You won't believe this. I think this is awesome. Like, we've hit the bottom. Healing has begun, because this was nutty stuff. I have to give credit to executives, he writes here, major credit, because this will send shockwaves throughout corporate America, because this isn't just a corporation. This is Walmart. Big, bold percentage of everything that happens in America happens because of Walmart. This is the biggest win yet for our movement to end wokeness in corporate America. Here are the changes that they've committed to. First, surveys. Walmart will no longer participate in the HRC's woke corporate equality index. This index, you had to fill it out and they gave you a score. And if you got a bad score, I don't know what happened. You didn't get a fruit basket this year. I don't know. Yeah, Larry the Logger. What? No DEI at Walmart. Oh no. Where will Lindsey Graham buy his truckets? I don't know. He's going to have to go black market on that stuff, but I bet he does a lot of stuff black market, if you follow my drift. But check this out. This goes further. Okay. Products. So they're going to monitor the Walmart marketplace to identify and remove inappropriate sexual and or transgender products marketed to children. I didn't pull the clip up, but maybe you remember Alex Stein 99 going into Target to find the tuck-friendly line of children's swimwear, right? For example, I think maybe that's an example of what we're talking about here. Yeah. Hey, just a second, Brojo. I'll get to that in a second. That's a good comment there. So absolutely, this whole idea that they wanted to break every possible boundary, right, on the woke side, and the whole transgender thing, I don't agree at all with it being LGBTQ plus 2IAZ LMNOP, right? Those are all separate concepts in there. And so the whole idea that the transgender movement had to be accepted whole cloth, anything they thought up, Drag's Time Story reading hour, exposing themselves on stage in front of children, having children tuck dollar bills into their G strings, that kind of stuff. No, there's no reason that we should have had to accept that, along with people who just wanted gay marriage. Perfectly right, reasonable. Got the W off of that a while ago and everything. So just a bizarre thing. So that it got that far, and now some of that healing is starting to come back, which is good. It's a good thing. They're push and pull. Funding of grants, they're going to review all funding of Pride and other events to avoid funding inappropriate sexualized content targeting kids. Why is this even a thing that we had to fight for to get back? Sexually targeting kids is a no-no. I shouldn't have to explain that, right? But that's where we ended up somehow. And whoever was pushing this, the people who were really pushing this, and I'm talking to you, Pritzker family, right? The people who were really promoting this, I think we have to understand what your actual motivations here were. And I believe that the Pritzker family in particular, they have to answer some questions. They're going to have to tell us what they were thinking, what their aims were, and we want honesty. We're gonna know if they're BSing us, right? Like they have been. So I'd love to hear some explanations around that. Next, equity. They are not going to extend the Racial Equity Center, which was established in 2020. This is a special 5-year initiative, so that's not going to carry on. They're going to evaluate supplier diversity programs and ensure they do not provide preferential treatment and benefits to suppliers based on diversity, which, as we all know, is a diversity in this sense is a euphemism for skin color, right? That also should have been a no-no. Like, again, how is it that we correct the idea that there's somebody thinks, we have an inappropriate amount of focus on skin color. So the way we correct that is by making sure that we preferentially focus on skin color to correct that. The two wrongs make a right. It's just bizarre. It never made sense. Of course, it was incoherent, but I actually think that was part of the reason why. I think that yeah. And it was meant to be incoherent. By the way, quick comment here. With a super chat in there. Thanks much, Bass Studios. Hey, Pete, Chris, fams, leave ScumTube and support Chris on Stoffels, Stoffels, the Honey Badgers. Choose Rumble instead. And Chris, get Weinstein to rally Rogan onto you. I try. I try. We'll see if we can get there. Honey Badger. If you don't know who Stoffel is, you should look that up. The original Honey Badger. And we do also stream this over to Rumble. And truthfully, I've been pushing to see how much I can get away with on the ScumTube just to see, because I'm just 100% committed to free speech. I absolutely support your right to say things that I may or may not find offensive. And it's up to me to deal with my own reaction as an adult. And if I do find anytime I'm on an emotional scale and I find myself on a scale of 0 to 10 and I'm above a 2 on that scale, as Evie tells me, anything over a 2, that's my stuff, right? If I'm really getting angry about something, getting triggered, that's me. I got to look at that. Probably has something to do with my mom or my dad or some childhood thing. That's on me. So I absolutely support the right of everybody to say things that are uncomfortable or triggering, for sure. That's the bare minimum. But beyond that, the way we get rid of bad ideas is by challenging them. We don't misinformation label them. We don't penalize them. We don't debank people because they're not holding the idea that we think they ought to be holding, because that's not how life works. It's not how we advance. Science is a rough and tumble game. It's bare-knuckled brawling, and that's what it takes to get a new idea wrestled out of the ether down here into the firmament. It's a sport. It is not for the faint of heart, but it requires free speech. And so all of this stuff, the diversity stuff here I saw, is anti-free speech. It was an attempt to legislate an outcome rather than incentivize an outcome. It was very, very wrong. As well, carrying on, Latinx Walmart will no longer use that term in official communications, and Walmart will discontinue racial equity training through the Racial Equity Institute, and Walmart's going to discontinue the use of DEI as a term while ensuring a respectful and supportive environment. Our focus is on belonging for all associates and customers. All associates and customers. That would have gotten you racially dinged a while ago if you said, I support all lives. Oh, you horrible human being, you. So carrying on, but it's not just Walmart. It's not just Walmart because of the work of Robbie Starbuck and others, but Robbie's gets a big share of this. So far, he says, you've helped me change corporate policy at Tractor Supply, at John Deere, Harley Davidson, Polaris, Indian Motorcycle, Lowe's, Ford, Coors, Stanley Black & Decker, Jack Daniels, DeWalt Tools, Craftsman, Caterpillar, Boeing, Toyota, and now Walmart. And at least part of the reason is because this stuff doesn't help a company be better at doing what it does, which is delivering products and earning money in the process, delivering value to their customers. It just, the data was, it just didn't help. And so that makes it exceedingly surprising. And just one second, I'm going to have to pull this up. So I got to switch screens here because I found this pretty astonishing here that, after the Bud Light thing, we saw all the Bud Light stuff go down. And then this happened. The Jaguar comes out with this as an ad. Bizarre to me, just absolutely bizarre, because, and let me get back to my main presentation here. How is it, did they not see what happened to Bud Light? I don't even understand how something like this comes forward. And I'm thinking, what was it like to be in that meeting where Jaguar is discussing this, forgetting about the immolation of the Bud Light brand? They must have looked deep into their marketing research and said, this speaks to our clientele. Like the people who drive Jaguars look like what we just saw in that video. I guess that's who their clientele is. That's who they're catering to. Alternatively, I can't really figure out. I mean, that's normally what marketing is supposed to do, is to alert people to your brand, tell them about the features of your product, whether you're evoking an emotional connection or response to that, or you're giving some factual recitation of why this is going to add value to their lives. You connect the customer to your product. How did that thing we just saw, how did that connect people to the Jaguar car? And it's a car, and it's an expensive car. I don't know. I guess this is why it's concerning. It's concerning because what we just saw there was the supplanting of one ideology for another. Now, the religion in corporate world for a very long time has been money, right? That's it. It's profits, shareholder value. It's market share that is a proxy for more money. So that was the ideology, and you would do things and organize and push your efforts around that. Now, clearly what happened with Bud Light was value destroying. It was about making less money. But that meant that the ideology of that was more important to them than the making of the money. And that's really a weird thing, because it's a very rare thing to find that an ideology replaces another ideology. That's a big deal. That's kind of like, oh, well, I was a full-blown religious member of this faith, and I just went to this faith. Maybe I'll go back. Like, it's normally not how these things work. So, excuse me, that was very bizarre to me, because it meant that this woke ideology was actually exceedingly powerful. Okay. And so I think we have to note those things for what they tell us when they happen. The idea that these things, that the power of that is actually, it's frightening, to be honest. It's a little worrying. And so I was getting very worried about watching that particular ideology spread. It got to the point where it was harming children, where people were abandoning all sorts of like very long-held, cherished cultural beliefs, all thrown out the window. Now, some of that was just organic and some of it wasn't organic. There were actual people pushing for this stuff. It's kind of like the debanking of people. That's not entirely just a thing that happens because banks decide that's good policy. There's an inorganic motion of that as well. And so, wow, pretty intense. Hey, yeah, Brojo again here writing, in the new year, Jaguar will manufacture only electric vehicles with the exception of one model, the 225 Jaguar F-Pace, which returns for the 2025 model year as the last gas-powered Jaguar. Huh, I did not know that. Who's willing to bet that gets reversed? Of course, at great expense. They're going to have to retool lines to begin remanufacturing internal combustion engines. But what we're finding, particularly in places that went down the green, let's say green power, green energy pathway, they're discovering, wow, that stuff's kind of expensive. And so that's a pretty bold bet right there to just go all in like that, especially for a company like Jaguar. So best of luck with that. I don't know. But I can tell you, I'm pretty happy with the way things turned out, because I was very worried about what I was watching happening under the Biden administration, where it was obvious he had mental decline going on for a long time. That was obvious. Of course, the world pretended to be shocked when he really obviously couldn't comport himself at the debate with Trump. It was nice of Trump to give him an early debate, because that way their internal team could readjust and take Biden off and give a higher quality candidate. But of course, they declined to do that, and there was no process, and they gave us Kamala Harris instead. And so here's an important message from Kamala. I don't know how they shot this and then allowed it to go out into the world. Let's listen in.
I just have to remind you, don't you ever let anybody take your power from you. You have the same power that you did before November 5th. And you have the same purpose that you did. And you have the same ability to engage and inspire. So don't ever let anybody or any circumstance take your power from you.
You know, that's missing something. Thank God the internet is there. Let's listen in. Makes more sense now.
Take your power from you. You have the same power that you did before November 5th.
I love the internet.
And you have the same purpose.
It's one of my favorite things. You got to have fun with this. So the memes have just been relentless. They're absolutely on point. I love them to death. And by the way, here's what it sounds like slowed down a tick. I think this really brings it into sharp focus.
Don't you ever let anybody take your power from you. You have the same power that you did before November 5th. And you have the same purpose.
All right, just having some fun, but that reminds me of something too.
Don't you?
Oh, I know what that reminds me of.
It places the lotion in the basket.
You place the lotion in the basket. Come on. You hear it too, don't you?
Ever let anybody take your power from you.
Put the lotion in the basket. Okay, just having some fun with all this. Because how did it come to this? I mean, just full stop. Let's just examine what this means, that this was somehow what the system came up with. So I think we can understand the system's lost its way, and it's definitely due for a reset. Maybe not the great reset they were thinking about before, but this right here is absolutely prima facie evidence that the system is in need of a little bit of help. And the Democratic Party in particular, if they had managed, I'm convinced that if the Democratic Party had put somebody like Tulsi Gabbard, if they had nurtured and cultured her along, or had run a primary and RFK Jr. had won, I think they could have won. But they didn't. They chose to go some other path. And now, once the election has happened, seeing that they are doing everything they can to, at a minimum, saddle Trump with a very sticky situation with Russia, or even more likely, trigger a world war. They are working very hard to do that. And you're right, Michael Zell. We are not out of the woodshed yet, because she is still technically a heartbeat away from the presidency. And as well, there are a lot of things that could happen between here and January 20th, which is Inauguration Day for Trump. Things could happen, right? And I think we're all concerned by that. What might happen? It's obvious that somebody within the Biden administration, we don't know who that is, we don't know, is actively working to try and create a world war. Let's be honest, we're kind of already at war, right? I mean, what's the definition? When one side takes lethal military weapons that they've made and shoots them at the other side, could we agree? Is that a war? Is that technically a war? Even though we haven't declared one, Congress has abdicated its responsibility to pass a war resolution. Hasn't done it since I forget when. It's been forever. So they don't do that. But is that the definition of a war? When one side is shooting at the other and maybe killing them? Well, that's what's happening in Ukraine. U.S. missiles are being maintained, installed, targeted by U.S. contractors or servicemen, advisors, whatever we call them, to skirt the technicalities. And then those things are being fired into Russia. And Russia said, stop it. Don't do that. Just don't. And of course, that led to Russia firing an IRBM, the Hazel, the Oreshnik. And now we're at this place where we have basically a really dicey situation. And what makes it particularly alarming to me is the fact that it's not being talked about at all in the US press, just barely, if at all. And it's just sort of being looked past. But look at all the things we've had to sort of just shrug and go past right now. There's been an alarming number of things. If Trump hadn't turned his head, right? And somehow that whole thing, which, I did the Trump shooting investigation, that's a big, wide open, like that thing was just absolutely done as poorly as possible from an investigative standpoint. And now they're just sort of like, they've just moved past it. Like, how do you do that? How do you just sort of forget about that misadventure? There it is. But there's another piece here I want to go to, which is going to be called into sharp relief, I hope now, because of this. Jay Bhattacharya has been selected to head the NIH by Trump. What I'm seeing on the MAHA side, the Make America Healthy Again side, is actually really, really positive. And so, yeah, Joe asking here, how do we move past Operation Warp Speed? I can't. Okay. And this is kind of interesting because with this selection right here, what we're seeing is that Trump has said, wow, I'm going to put somebody in here who, well, let's listen in. I think you'll agree that this is not a Operation Warp Speed aficionado here in any sense.
Public health bureaucrats operate more like dictators than scientists during the pandemic, sealing themselves off from credible outside criticism. Consider, for instance, the treatment of scientific dissidents outside the government who contradicted public health dogma. In the earliest days of the pandemic, public health bureaucrats organized a cover-up of the hypothesis that COVID emerged as a result of a laboratory leak, calling scientists who proposed the idea conspiracy theorists. Only recently have official bodies started to admit the hypothesis is plausible and maybe even true, and certainly not a conspiracy. Where do the scientists whose careers were destroyed advancing the idea go to get their reputations back? When Martin Kulldorff of Harvard University here today, Sunetra Gupta, a professor at Oxford University, and I proposed a focused protection alternative, not a herd immunity alternative, to lockdowns in October 2020, then NIH director Francis Collins labeled the three of us fringe epidemiologists and engaged a media campaign to take down our proposal, to which tens of thousands of doctors, epidemiologists, and scientists endorsed, including a Nobel Prize winner. Under the banner of combating misinformation, government health agencies use their power to collaborate with social media companies to control the public conversation about science, COVID science, and policy. The pattern repeated itself throughout the pandemic, with science bureaucrats abusing their authority to create an illusion of scientific consensus in favor of destructive ideas when none existed. So the American people deserve answers to fundamental questions about the pandemic. On what empirical basis were schools closed? Did public health decision makers consider the harms of their policies as thoroughly as their putative benefits? Why did authorities ignore recovered immunity or failure of the vaccine to prevent disease transmission in recommending vaccine mandates and discriminatory vaccine policies? With such a litany of failure, the American people deserve an honest COVID commission to evaluate the response and document all the errors as well as the few successes.
Wow. Yes. Yes. Unbelievable. What a turnaround. This is amazing. So I am not like everybody. I didn't get all of my personal wish list of appointees by Trump, but you know what? If we can take RFK Jr. as head of HHS, Jay Bhattacharya now head of the NIH, and we're going to get a good ag secretary in there. If we could come up with borders again, and we can get these medical tyranny people on the run, and we can actually have some consequences land where they should, I'll take it, right? If we can just stop poisoning ourselves and stop poisoning our own children. Of course, that is one of the definitions of evil, is that you actually harm or sacrifice your own child. It's in the Bible. Don't do that, right? So this has been happening, and it's been because of some really gross set of people, not least of which is the guy he's replacing, Francis Collins. Remember, he's got that old shucks grandpa-y thing. He plays the guitar. Oh, shucks. He is an evil, nasty human being, that Collins guy, right? There he is, right? Right down there. And so here he is writing in October of 2020, and this is the global declaration for the Great Barrington Declaration, which Jay just referred to, which he did with Koldorf and Snepta, and they write this global declaration that said, hey, maybe we should just like protect the people who are most at risk and let everybody else just sort of get on with their lives, which was exactly the right position to take. So in bureaucratic speak here, we see Francis Collins here writing to Anthony Fauci and also Cliff Lane here, CCing in Lawrence Tabak there. So these are all NIAID, NIH people about the Great Barrington Declaration. That's the subject. Hi, Tony and Cliff. This proposal from the 3 fringe epidemiologists who met with the secretary seems to be getting a lot of attention. Even a co-signature from Nobel Prize winner Mike Levitt at Stanford. There needs to be a quick and devastating published takedown of its premises. I don't see anything like that. Is it underway? Again, process is punishment. He's not saying, hey, look, we have this incredible data over here that supports the idea of generalized lockdowns, masks for toddlers, mandatory vaccinations for everybody. They had no data. They had no data for 6 feet away. It was just stuff they were making up. You know what he was mad about? He was mad about anybody having the temerity to say, hey, we see this differently. Obviously, what's the devastating published takedown? Well, he probably should have called up the people over at the banking side of things and said, can you debank these people? They're dangerous people. They dare to disagree with me. So don't fall for his, oh, gee shucks, kindly grandpa act. That you put that in the same bin as Janet Yellen's, oh, gee shucks, kindly grandmotherly act. It's an act. These are nasty, vile people. Okay. And there it is in black and white. And so, by the way, I have tons of other stuff about this Collins guy. Speaking of which, the other thing that Jay did mention, which is important, Francis Collins here, writing to Jeremy Farrar, who isn't even in the U.S. government. That's the two. Everybody else is CC'd on this thing. Jeremy Farrar is this UK fellow who happens to be head of something called the Wellcome Trust, which nominally is about health solutions, but it's really about squashing dissent, crushing people, and getting pharma products pushed into the marketplace. That's what it's all about. So Francis, writing to Jeremy, bothering to copy in Tony and Lawrence here, Larry, says, Jeremy, though the arguments from Ron Faucier and Christian Drosten, 2 international virologists, are presented with more forcefulness than necessary, I'm coming to the view that a natural origin is more likely, right? But I share your view that a swift convening of experts in a confidence-inspiring framework is needed, or the voices of conspiracy will quickly dominate, doing great potential harm to science and international harmony. Okay. Anyway, so he was part of the COVID cover-up conspiracies, right? I believe in this. I believe 100% that the best way to stop the next pandemic is that we arrest everybody who started the first one and we put them in prison, and we take away all their money and anything they've squirreled away in an offshore Cayman account, anything they gave to a cousin thrice removed, anything that they had secured as part of their illicit behavior gets taken away from them. Full stop. Everything. We use the full power of the state to actually prosecute and punish the people who deserve to be prosecuted and punished. And that would include this little troll right here, Peter Hotez. He lied repeatedly about his involvement with Fauci and the likelihood of a lab leak, and covered up all of his conflicts of interest. Just lied. It's just these people are no good. They are liars. And they, by the way, funded the coronavirus that came out and then blocked anybody who wanted to look into that. I got strikes. In my first time I put a piece out was May 4th, 2020. I said, oh, the genetic signature of this thing actually is most consistent with coming out of a lab, right? Because of that PRRA, the furin cleavage site there at the S1, S2 spike protein boundary. That is an inserted feature. It's a cassette that virologists put in there to make things more tasty and pandemic-y, right? It was very clearly smoking gun, 100% obvious, and they knew about that. And they knew about this. I have emails from, in this case, Christian Anderson to Tony Fauci on the 31st of January, 2020. So they had that same thing, but they had it months before I did, because of course they got the signature and they knew the space better than I did. Took me a few months to catch up, took other people a few months to catch up. But hey, I think the world basically figured this out. You had the Drastic crew, you had Charles Rixley, you had Dow U15, you had Jicky the Mouse. You had all these people on Twitter who resolved all this stuff, pretty much by early spring 2020, that this clearly came from a lab. And then these people covered it up. These people covered it up. These people covered it up. And I say we don't just shrug and move past this. We can't. I mean, this was, if you buy the official story that 1 million people in the US died from COVID, and I don't. If 1 million people died, it was because of remdesivir and ventilators and lack of care and dehydration and just a basically ugly situation that needs to be explored and examined with criminal and civil penalties all around for everybody involved in that. But if you bought that official story, then these people are responsible for 1 million deaths. Full stop. Okay. And hey, listen, Mr. Worthless Eater, I will take it. I would love to be on the commission. I don't need to head it up, but I want a truth commission. If there is a commission forming to look into who was responsible for covering this up, I want in on that, because I have an inner prosecutor that's just itching to come out of the gate and stretch its legs a little on this particular subject, because I have I keep receipts. I keep all these things. I'm a little bit of a pack rat when it comes to old emails and stuff like that. But if you could imagine if you had subpoena powers, that would be a lot of fun. By the way, I know how to get stuff like this done. What I would do in the commission is I would send out a little bat signal and I would say, hey, here's what we're investigating. Anybody who can bring us solid evidence of criminal wrongdoing or even moral wrongdoing, if you can bring the goods, we're talking emails, we're talking documents, anything that you could document, you will be given immunity. We're only offering immunity to 5 people, and it's the first 5 people through the door. I bet you set an egg timer. Within 60 minutes, all 5 have come through the door, folders full of things, boxes of folders, and off we go, right? And everybody else is going to get the full weight of the law. And I think some of these things actually have the most severe consequence of all attached to it because of what was actually done. And I would very, very much enjoy having people be held accountable, because if we don't, here's what happens when you don't hold people accountable. I mean, we all know now that, of course, they still want to keep the JFK files hidden for another 50 years because there's something embarrassing in there. And once you look into the JFK shooting in Dealey Plaza, you realize it's pretty unlikely that that was one shooter from behind. In fact, it looks most likely that it was a shot from the front. And that's why the brain had to go missing in autopsy, et cetera. Okay. But we never really dealt with that. And I think everybody knows now that that story was not as advertised, and the Warren Commission's main job was to cover the whole thing up. Fine. They did that. But we've never coughed that national hairball up. Okay. So it's been sitting there and lurking there. And as a consequence, I would submit to you that we've had to deal with all the downstream consequences of that. And here's you cannot move on without truth and reconciliation. You can't just have the reconciliation. There has to be that truth element. And sometimes that truth element is going to have to come with consequences for people who did things that are unforgivable, that deserve consequences. It's just life. So anyway, I hope we can have a little life. Now, let me carry on with this. So here's what we know now. And we know this is for fact. This is from October of 2023. It's revealed that Anthony Fauci's, one of his NIAID run labs in Montana, was experimenting with a coronavirus strain that it got shipped in from Wuhan. Even a year before the COVID pandemic officially began. Okay. There's that, right? And Paul Thacker, who does great investigative work on this and great investigative reporting, So to remember, he says here, story after story in Scientific American and Science Magazine, Nature, NPR, BBC, New York Times, Washington Post, claiming a possible Wuhan lab accident was a conspiracy. Remember that? Well, they lied to you. Right now, Professor Tim Spector, King's College London and pandemic advisor to the UK government says, well, it's looking increasingly likely. That was a bit of a cover-up, right? And that the most likely source of this was a lab leak from Wuhan. Could have been a lab leak. I don't like that. That ascribes a method, a mechanism there. It describes maybe it was an accident. A leak is an accident, right? So let's just call it lab origin. Then we don't have to guess whether it leaked or was intentionally leaked or was a malicious rogue actor. We don't have to, that's all secondary stuff that a proper investigation might reveal. But the only conspiracy involved in this whole thing was the cover-up. And there it is. In every major news organization that ran interference for that, this is why we're reporting and pulling all our information off of X now, and why nobody who's a thinking human being trusts the BBC, NPR, New York Times, Washington Post, Nature, Science Magazine, or Scientific American. You completely lost the plot line. It's kind of like a farmer who forgot that their job was to grow food, right? It's like a dentist who decided to specialize in flower arrangements. It's like, I don't know what you guys and gals were doing over there in the media, but man, you dropped the ball. No good. All right. I think here now we're looking at, this is good. I like this a lot. So from Teague Materi, how does Doge, D-O-G-E, complete their mission without collapsing the entire banking system, knowing how it always needs money printing inflation versus a $2 trillion cut in deflation? This is a great question, and we're going to have to really focus on this in probably next time. This deserves a whole episode all on its own, but let's start here. In 2019, the federal spending was $2 trillion less than it is today. Do we think it's impossible that we couldn't just dial back federal spending to 2019 levels without like fire and brimstone and, demons rising from the swampy miasma of the earth? No, obviously we can do this, but it's going to be painful. You're absolutely right. The deeper question that's baked in this, which I like, is this whole idea that we seem to have a system that needs money printing and inflation and can't survive deflation. There's a lot of wisdom in that phrasing. So that's what we're going to need to talk about. It's going to take a whole episode sometime because we do have an exponential money system. It's not money, it's currency. It's not even currency, it's debt-based currency. Because of that, it's constantly expanding or it's busy collapsing. This is the prime premise in the crash course. This is what I've spent a lot of my life doing, is trying to educate, not trying, I think I've done a pretty credible job talking about this so that we can understand the system of money. The deeper thing that's been put here by Teague Materi is, do we have a system that can be reformed, or is it just either expanding or collapsing? Like, how do we do this without collapsing it? Now, that's a fair question, and I'm not sure if it can be done. I don't know. But if we were being smart about this, you know what we would do? We would have multiple systems of money. Sure, have Federal Reserve notes. Maybe also have direct issue treasury notes, but also allow and authorize an ecosystem that could include Bitcoin or other digital assets, could include gold-backed currency. They have these, the gold backs, which are actually plastic laminated, electro-deposited gold, so that you can have very small amounts, so that you could actually have reasonable, like a gold coin is like $2,500, $2,600 of stuff. I'm talking like having $5, $10 worth of gold on a note, right? Have that. And then may the best currency win. May the best money win. And they all will do different things. And then the Federal Reserve would have to go, oh, well, we don't have a gun enforced monopoly on the situation anymore. Now we actually have to think about our customers, which are the people who we want to use our currency. Oh, I guess we can't just treat them abusively anymore. We'll have to treat them with respect, and we'll have to treat our own currency with respect, which they haven't been doing, obviously, at all. So great question. We're going to have to go more deeply into what that actually implies. I don't know if it's possible. I do not know if we can get to a point where we can reform the system without real serious pain. But guess what? When you live beyond your means for a while, sometimes you got to live below your means to correct for that. That's true of an individual. It's true of a family. It's true of a company. It's true of a nation. So we've lived beyond our means for a while, just borrowed, always thinking there's more in the future. Somehow it'll all work itself out. So far it has, but we're starting to see the actual cracks in the system that maybe this can't work forever anymore. And we're watching that as the BRICS develop their own currencies and things like that. And so there was a piece here which said, looking for a comment here. Oh, I lost it. A lot of great comments. Sorry, it went by before I could get my clicker over on it. So I don't know. I don't know how we're going to get through this, but I do know that it has to begin with truth. And so this was the great thing that was revealed throughout all of this so far, was that there are camps of people. I call one camp the abstractionists. They believe in abstract things like we fix racial inequality by focusing on people's skin color. Like, it's very abstract set of concepts, and they're after an abstract set of aims like equity. Well, what is that? Well, how much time do you have? I'll start trying to explain it. So they're into abstract things. And then there's the realists, right? We're over here living in the real world where the cows have to be fed. You either put food on the table and, you go to work or you don't, right? So real versus abstract, that's been the breakdown for a while. And now we're starting to see reality come back in. The problem is that at the leadership level, at the federal government level, we have a lot of people who live in the world of abstractions. And unfortunately, some of those abstractions are quite deadly, potentially, right? Remember, it was an abstraction that we could just sort of manufacture weapons of mass destruction out of thin air as a concept. Turned out not to be true. It's a lot of lies. A lot of people died. But the abstraction that they were selling that to us with was, oh, well, we will be greeted as liberators with flowers. That did not happen. But that reality, that didn't happen, the non-reality of that delusion didn't feed back in, and they proceed with that delusion again, and then again, and then again, right? And now it's at a very dangerous spot where they're saying, the world would just be a better place if we could just get rid of Putin. So when the French foreign minister came out and said they're authorizing the use of French Scalp missiles deep into Russia with no red lines, that's diplomatic speak for, yeah, if these things are targeted at Putin, that'd be a shame, right? So great. So they get rid of Putin because that abstraction is, once we get rid of him, everything's fine. What they don't know or don't seem to know is that there's probably a whole host of very much more difficult hardliners right behind him, ready to step into place, who are going to be even less happy about the way they're being treated in this larger story. So these delusions of these abstractionists, we got to be careful. Very dangerous time to be living around these folks right now, because their delusions are deadly. They were wrong about masks. They were wrong about the vaccines, which aren't really vaccines. They were wrong about them staying localized in a place in the arm. They were wrong about them not containing DNA. They were wrong about those DNA plasmids not somehow accidentally getting replicated and carried on within some people. They've been wrong about all kinds of things because they have these delusions that they're adhering to. I'm hoping we're turning back towards reality. I'm hoping that what we see in the Walmart story and the John Deere and all that stuff, I'm hoping that we've turned the corner and we can get back down to the much more serious business of actually comporting ourselves with this thing we call reality. So that's my show for today. Thanks very much, everybody, for being here. Loved your comments. Sorry I couldn't get to all of them. And next time, I think we're going to have to look into how exactly will the money system carry on as we go forward. Great topic, really worth exploring. Until next time, everybody, thanks, and see you next time. Signal Hour, Wednesdays at 1 o'clock Eastern. See you then. Bye-bye.